Mrs. Lighthouse. How are you today?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining me to discuss Amy's test scores.
Thank you. I'm very excited to see how she's doing.
Yeah, I'm excited to share it with you. So Amy took the comprehensive test of achievements, and I'm just going to explain to you today like what that is and how she did on her scoring.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so as I said, Amy took the comprehensive test of achievement, which you see here. An achievement test is basically just measuring the skills that I've taught Amy and seeing how she's done up to this point. So for the scores that you see here, there's two separate sets of scores. The top set of scores are the norm reference scores, and so that's really just saying that there was a group of students, about 2,500, that took the test before it was released. And these students are from across the nation, but they're the same age and the same grade that Amy are in. And so we just took Amy's scores here and compared them to that norm group. And then for the bottom set of scores, these are called the criterion reference scores. And these just have the content areas that you saw up here broken down further. So as you see for word analysis, it's broken down into 5 different sections that she was tested on. Yeah. Okay, so as I said, Amy took the comprehensive test of achievement. An achievement test basically measures where Amy is at now, like this on the skills that she's learned thus far in the semester, and where we want to take Amy. So what she can improve on, what more we need to teach her, those kind of things. And so there's 2 different sets of scores that you're going to see here. And the top section is the norm referenced. And this has all of the different content areas such as like reading, math, science, and social studies. And then what it means by norm is a group of students from across the nation that are in the same age and grade level as Amy. They took the test before it was released. There was about 2,500 students in the norm group. And here we just compare Amy's scores to that norm group to see how she's doing compared to other students from the nation. Do you have any questions so far?
Yes. About how many people are in the norm group, and are they the same age as Amy?
Yes, actually. I kind of mentioned that earlier. So there's 2,500 students in the norm group, and they're in 3rd grade just like Amy. Their ages range from 8 to 9. That's typically how old a 3rd grader is. And yeah, they, like I said, they're from all across the nation. So they all took the same test as Amy, but just before it was released.
Okay. And what does that mean by battery when it says that down there?
Oh yeah, the basic and complete battery. I'm glad you asked about that. I was actually confused about that when I first learned about achievement. So basic battery is how Amy did in the specific content areas. So how she did in reading, math, science, and social studies. And then the complete battery is how she did overall on the whole test. So that's like her overall grade. And then this one is just in the basic content areas. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes so much more sense. What does it mean when it says subtext?
I'm glad you asked that question. So the comprehensive test of achievement is the name of the whole test, but the subtests make up the whole test. So the subtests are like reading, math, science, and social studies, and then like I said earlier, they're broken down even further into vocabulary, word analysis. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So since we're talking more about the norm referenced information right now, I'm going to go ahead and explain a few more things about this top section of the scoring. So right here you see number of items. So that just means how many items for that particular subject were on the test. So let's look at math. So it says total mathematics, number of items were 107. But then you look below that and it says math concepts, so the number of questions that talked about math concepts were 35, for problem solving 44, and for procedures 28. And so if you add 35, 44, and 28 up, you're going to get the total of 107 math questions that there were. Does that make sense? Okay, so moving on to the next column. The next column is labeled raw score. So this is just the total score for each section of the test. So for example, you see total reading score was 83, and then for vocabulary, the total score was 26. And so that's just going to be the raw score as she did on each section of the test. And then the next column is the national percentiles. So like we talked about earlier, they compare Amy's scores to a norm group. And so once the test makers got these norm group scores, they divided them into sections called percentiles. And so that's what you see here on the bell curve. They have the percentile equivalents. They're from 1 to 99. And so in the middle here, what you see highlighted right here, that's going to be the average scores that the norm group scored on the test. So we can use this to see where Amy fell, like on their grading level. So let's look at her vocabulary score. So for vocabulary, she ranked in the 49th percentile. So let's go back to the bell curve. So she fell right about here, right before 50. So she's in the orange, so she scored about average. And the 49 means that Amy performed better than 49% of students in the norm group. And so let's look at another one, just to make sure we understand. So for math concepts, she scored in the 52nd percentile. So let's go back, and she fell about right here. So still in the orange, and that means that she performed better than 52% of students in the norm group. So she did pretty well. She stayed in the average area, which is good. Moving on, we're going to move to this big section that you see right here. So this section is called the standard error of measurement, and basically the test admits like no test is ever going to be perfect. Some questions might be weirdly worded or might have misspelled words or things like that. It also recognizes that our kids aren't perfect, and so, you know, Amy might not have gotten a good night's rest one night, or she might have, you know, just like been really nervous to take the test, as I know most of us are to take any test. So this area just kind of recognizes that. And so what these little bands here represent is it's saying that if Amy were to take this test on any other day, the width of the band is going to show around the area of how she would have done. So let's look at reading comprehension. So on reading comprehension, she scored in the 68th percentile. And so it's saying that on any given day, she's going to score anywhere from the 68th until about the 72nd percentile. That's where she's going to fall in the range of the percentiles for that test. Okay. So I've explained a lot here. Do you have any questions?
I do. I understand the other column, but what's this column right here, the scaled scores?
So the scaled score is the test makers actually took the raw score and converted it to a new chosen scale. So keep in mind that this scale might be different for different tests. So it's not always going to be the same. But for this one, if you look on the bell curve, they actually chose this scale. And so let's use one of Amy's scaled scores to compare it to. So let's look down in social studies. In social studies, she's got a scaled score of 567. And these are still compared to the norm group. So let's look here. 567 is going to fall right about here. So Amy did actually almost a little above average. She's almost out of the orange there. So she did really well. So yeah, that's for the scaled score. Does that make sense?
Yes. I understand about the top box now. What about the bottom box? What is that?
Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned in the beginning, this bottom part is what they call the criterion reference scores. So these aren't being compared to the norm group anymore. It's just how Amy did as an individual. And it still has the raw score and the number of possible questions on the test, just as we saw the number of items up here. And like I said, it also breaks down the content areas up here further and into more detailed skills. And we can also see how Amy scored on a different level of low, medium, and high. And then I was just asking a question. Okay. So let's look through these subtest areas. Are there any that you don't recognize?
Okay, I understand vocabulary, but what is structural analysis and the phonemic?
The phonetic analysis?
Yes.
Structural analysis and phonetic analysis, they sound like really big, like complex words to understand. But basically, structural analysis is the dividing of words into parts to discover what an unknown word means. So yeah, a kid can just like divide the words into parts if they don't know a word to figure out the meaning. And then for phonetic analysis, that's going to be the process of using relationships between spelling and pronunciation to figure out unknown words. So kind of the same concept, just a little bit different. Does that make sense?
Yes, please continue.
Okay, so here again we see the raw score. So that's how Amy scored. That's how Amy did on those particular questions. You look up here at structural analysis, which we just went over what that is. She scored a 10 out of 10 possible questions. And then in this section over here, it's going to rank her how that score was. So from low, medium to high. She did really well in that section, which ranked her in the high ranking level over here on the scale. We're looking at scores. Let's look at a few more of Amy's scores. So let's start with capitalization, which is, right here. So on capitalization, she got an 11 total correct out of 12 possible questions. And so that ranked her very high on the scale. So she did really well there. Which if you look at her writing portfolio, you can see on her writing work, she capitalizes everything really well. The beginning of sentences, names, and all that, she does really well. And let's look at punctuation, which is right below that. She scored a 10 out of 11 possible questions, which is really well as well. So she also ranked high on the scale for that. And if you look again at her writing, you can see that she uses punctuation very well for quotation marks and the sentences. So she does really well. So those scores prove to be right. Next, let's take a look at one of her math scores. Let's take a look at number facts right here. She scored an 8 correct out of a total of 12 possible questions. So unfortunately that score ranked low on the scale. But however, if you look here at her math portfolio right here, it seems like she really grasped the concept of number facts. And so I'm thinking maybe because there was only 12 questions, because she only missed 4, maybe that kind of knocked her score down really easily because there was a low number of questions. So we won't really rely on that score too much because we look at her work and we see different. And then finally, let's look at a science score. So for life science, she scored a 7 out of 7 correct. So that ranked her very high on the score. And you can see in her science work, for any life science activities that we did, she did really well and made hundreds on most of her assignments. So she really does well in life science. So yeah, those are some of her scores.
Is there something we can do to like supplement her things like math when she does poorly?
Yes, yeah. So there are actually some math websites that you can get onto that we get on during our math station time. So those have really great activities for her to practice her number facts and just math in general overall. And then also I have some math games that we play in class. And I can send some of those home with you. She can check them out and take them home for a couple of nights or so. Just kind of work on them at home. Just really encouraging her in math would be really beneficial for you. So do you have any more questions about Amy's scores?
Not right now. I think you covered it. Can I get a copy of her score?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I have that all right for you here. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. You can call again for another parent conference if you feel that's necessary. I think really just us working together is really going to help Amy be successful this year. She's such a great student, and I've enjoyed having her in my classroom. And just please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions.
Thank you. I will.
So thank you for coming in. It was nice to see you and meet you again. And I look forward to seeing you in the future.